zoom out for just a second and let's look at the chronology of a life. Joel, you, me, any individual who's ever lived the fullness of a 70-year, give or take, life is going to go through, in particular, I think probably three moments. Maybe the moment is a moment, or maybe the moment's like a month or a year or whatever that, however long that moment is, where they're going to have these face-to-face encounters with God. And those moments can be defined, or we're pressed into those moments by crises. These are crisis moments. Yeah. And so the three crises of a human lifetime are the identity crisis of youth. That's where we see Jacob at in Genesis 32. That's where we see young people, coming out of their teenage years and into their 20s, up even into their early 30s. They're in this period of time where this is the prime crisis that they're dealing with. It's a crisis of identity. Who am I? What am I in ministry? What am I going to do with my life? What is the direction of career? Who am I going to marry? Am I going to have children? What does life look like? And then the middle period of time is the period of time that I'm coming into, which is the middle ages of life. I just turned 40. And so the question is no longer, who am I? I think I'm comfortable in who I am and what God has called me to do. I have some very definite directions and assignments from God that he has given me that I think extend for the rest of my life. But the prevailing question at that second crisis that I'm wrestling with right now is not who am I or what am I, but what am I doing? And that's the midlife crisis. And, the jokes abound about the midlife crisis. You see the guy that dyes his hair blonde and buys a Corvette. And, he may switch wives or whatever they do in the world with a midlife crisis because they're wrestling with something that's a little bit deeper than identity. But now that I know who I am, what am I going to do with life? And that's a face-to-face moment as well. That's a Jacob moment when you have to get with God and discover that your worth is not based on what you're doing. Your worth is based on your obedience in who you are in relation to what he has called you to do and what he has called you to be. And that this thing is not accomplishment driven or performance driven. It's relationship driven and spirit led. And then that final crisis is the mortality crisis, which is not who am I, identity crisis, or what am I doing, midlife crisis, but it is what have I done? Have I made my mark? The big word at that point of life is legacy. And I think that again is a Jacob on the other side of Jabbok moment for people. And so that's what I think that it looks like when we zoom out and we see the whole timeline of life, that we're going to go through these moments that the world or psychologists, psychiatrists, whatever, may define as crisis moments. Now, when we zoom in particular to the first of those moments, it is the identity crisis. And it's seen in a lot of ways. It's seen in gender confusion. It is seen in homosexuality. It's seen flowing through promiscuity. Whatever the most accessible pathway of the base nature of a person is, that identity crisis is going to flow through that pathway or that channel that's been opened up in their life, whether it be by abuse or whatever it is. And so a lot of the sins of your generation, your peers at school, or that you see on the street, people who you may not know, but they're of the same age, and you see the weirdness taking place, that's them wrestling with this identity crisis, but they are not having a wrestling match with God in a lonely place.
Yeah.
They're in an ongoing negotiation, and they are continuing to try to offer up gifts to Esau, the old man, to appease him.
Mm.
And he doesn't stop the chase. He continues. And that old man will chase them into their midlife and will chase them into the mortality crisis. And so I paint that picture because I think it's important for us to not only understand um, just the very narrow perspective of where we're at today, but we need to see where we are in a bigger picture of life, and that sometimes gives us understanding of what we're fighting. This is why, I talk to Bible school kids from the different Bible colleges regularly, and they're trying to figure out: am I a pastor? Am I a teacher? Am I an apostle? Am I a prophet? What am I? That's part of the identity crisis that's showing up in the apostolic movement.
Yeah.
And I think as apostolic ministry, we can help them out with that. And you
Mm-hmm.
see guys like Brother Shelton in Arkansas, who has a definite gifting. Brother Nichols in the Louisville area, these men have definite giftings to minister to young people, to help them to figure out that big question: who am I, and what is my direction in life, specifically regarding apostolic ministry. And so once a young person begins to come to grips with that, there's an inner confidence that comes. And inner confidence will flow out into outer boldness. Paul said, I'm not ashamed. The reason why Paul was not ashamed is because there was an inner confidence that flowed out into an outer boldness in the Apostle Paul, to where he's able to declare the gospel in a very, very powerful way and take it from figuring out who he was into his midlife time period to where he's doing something in the kingdom of God.
Mm-hmm.
And so this whole insecurity thing and the inner battle is, there's nothing wrong with an individual that's wrestling with those things. It's part of the human condition. And if we stay in the spirit and walk in the spirit, then it will be a Jacob wrestling with God moment. But otherwise, if we're not in the spirit, we may be in the church, we may go to church, but we may not fully be surrendered to the ways of the spirit, and it can develop into an ongoing negotiation with Esau that follows for the rest of the life, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's good. I one thought I had with going through this is because it seems like that, even in that story of Jacob wrestling with the angel, or whether it was the Lord or not, you see that there come this point where the angel will say, gives him the opportunity to stop, right?
Yeah,
He
right.
says, the day is about to break, you need to let me go. And of course we preach about that a lot, like how Jacob said, no, I'm not going to let you go till you bless me. Um, and to me, it seems like that maybe, whether it's secular, those dealing with the gender identity type things, or even in the church, individuals who, because I guess my question is, do you think that there's something we can do to, because I don't necessarily see in Jacob's life that he did anything special he definitely didn't earn that face to face with
Right.
God.
Yeah.
But would you say there's anything in our life that we can do to get to that point? What does that look like, on a, maybe
Yeah.
not day-to-day basis, but someone who wants that type of encounter,
Yeah.
and then wants to also get through it?
Yeah.